Welcome to the American Society of Public Administration section on Science and Technology in Government's March Lunch and Learn. I am Georgette Dumont, the MPA Director at the University of North Florida. We are so happy that you are able to join us today for what's going to be a very interesting discussion. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel later on today. Before we start, I would like to let you know a little bit about ASPA's section on Science and Technology in Government. The mission of STIG is to assist public administrators to learn about the uses and limitations of science and technology in government. By promoting awareness of government's use of science and technology, STIG's goal is to improve government efficiency and effectiveness. STIG members are interested in a broad range of topics from environmental science to artificial intelligence to science innovation policies and everywhere in between. These are dynamic and exciting subject matters which government continues to grapple with and needs researchers and practitioners to explore. If you'd like more information about STIG, you can visit our website at sstig.info, I-N-F-O. In order to ensure a timely event, questions will be addressed at the end of the discussion. Please use the Q&A feature if you would like to submit a question prior to the end, or if you wish to ask the question directly, please use the raise hand function in Zoom and you will be called on as time allows. With that said, I'd like to turn the webinar over to our very own Dr. Sukumar Ganapati. Sukumar?
Thank you, Georgette, and thank you all for being able to join. And today we have the pleasure of having Professor Donald Norris, who is Professor Emeritus from University of Maryland at Baltimore County. He's a prolific author of many articles on e-government, on the use of technology adoption in the public sector, and lately on cybersecurity in local government. So welcome, Don.
Thank you.
We also have Laura Mateczun. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. Who is a co-author with Don on many of the cybersecurity pieces, and is working with a policy think tank in Maryland. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, and you pronounced my name correctly. So.
Thank you. And last but not the least, we have Tamecka McKay, who is the Chief Information Officer of the City of Fort Lauderdale. And if you have traveled to South Florida, Fort Lauderdale is often the airport of choice as compared to the city of Miami. And she has been leading all of the technology efforts in the city, as well as with, she has been with the Broward School and has had her fingers in a number of IT projects across in South Florida. So welcome, Tamecka.
Thank you, Dr. Ganapati.
So we want to start this webinar with what Don was going to lay out in terms of what we are seeing in the cyber policy side. The topic is on cyber policy, emerging questions and issues. So on that side, Don, give us a basic lay of the landscape. What do you see is happening on the cyber as well as the cybersecurity side?
Sure. I want to lead off, and Laura will follow with more discussion about policy per se. But I want to lead off with a few comments about barriers to cybersecurity. And we have found these barriers to be consistent over two major surveys and other research that we've done. And as long as these barriers are present, cybersecurity for local governments will be very, very difficult. And perhaps the most important barrier reported is about money. Local government officials, CISOs, CIOs, repeatedly tell us that they don't have enough money. We also hear from the other side. We hear from city managers, mayors, and other officials that those damn technology people are constantly asking for more money. So there's a little bit of a loggerhead there between what the technologists think they need in order to protect them from breaches and what the elected and appointed officials feel like they ought to be paying for. My view is that maybe the CISOs and CIOs are asking too much money, but I doubt it. And they certainly are not getting the funding in most places that they need. Another barrier is the inability to pay competitive salaries, which of course is related to the amount of money that they are allocated in the budgetary process. Many local governments do not have dedicated budgets for cybersecurity. Cybersecurity comes out of the CIO's budget. We feel very strongly that there ought to be dedicated cybersecurity budget in local governments, not waiting for handouts from some other unit in the government, county government. Lack of adequately trained personnel, that's also related to funding. Adequately trained personnel cost more than personnel who are not adequately trained. And in this world, you get what you pay for. Without adequately trained personnel, cybersecurity is not going to be able to prevent at high levels of effectiveness. These findings, by the way, are consistent with research that's been going on in e-government, IT and government since the 1990s. So there's nothing new here. By the way, what I just reported on was from our 2016 National Survey of Cybersecurity. And Laura and I also did a key informant survey of 14 local government CISOs and CIOs in 2020. And what we found there was lack of funds by 78%, lack of adequate staff by 35%. Again, related, not terribly different from what we found 4 years earlier. And then most recently, with the International City Management Association, the City County Management Association, we did a survey, another nationwide survey of cybersecurity in local government, and we didn't find much that was terribly different. Insufficient number of cybersecurity staff ranked first among major challenges that city and county governments ran into in terms of their cybersecurity. Lack of funding to upgrade systems, lack of cybersecurity awareness across the organization, and inability to pay competitive salaries. So those are the top challenges that we're being told confront local governments in the area of cybersecurity. And because they're so consistent over time, we have no reason to doubt them. Laura?
So I'm going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity policies that are highly recommended and should be implemented in local governments. Failure to adopt these and effectively implement them is often linked to adverse outcomes. And we go into greater detail about these in our book, but I'll kind of list the essential policies that we go into, and then there's a list of strongly recommended policies, but are perhaps not feasible.
You're muted.
I am muted. I apologize. So I am going to talk about policies and policies that are necessary to implement in order to improve local government cybersecurity postures. We go into these a lot in our book, but we have a list of essential policies and a list of strongly recommended policies. But the strongly recommended policies are potentially not feasible for governments of all sizes and all budgets, especially smaller budgets, to be able to implement, but I'll kind of go over them very quickly. For the essential policies, first is obviously an acceptable use policy governing how employees and others utilize the government IT systems. An information security policy describing how information is created, exchanged, and stored on the IT system, as well as how that information is protected, encrypted, or handled. A privacy policy governing how the government collects, uses, and stores and shares different types of information. An identity and access management policy noting how users are created and removed and how roles and permissions are assigned based on the user's function within the organization. An incident handling policy governing how the local government will respond to attacks and breaches, especially when critical functions and services are disrupted. And a disaster recovery or business continuity plan listing out how the government will respond to major emergencies. The desirable policies include a remote access policy, a bring your own device policy for employee-owned devices, an email use policy, a media and communications policy in the case of breaches, a change or configuration management policy establishing how the information system can be changed, a vulnerability and patch management policy addressing how and when vulnerabilities to products and applications are handled, and finally, a backup policy governing the frequency and method of information system backups. And it's important to say that it's not sufficient to simply adopt these policies. They must be implemented effectively. Otherwise, the policies won't work as intended and they'll have little or no effect, creating further unnecessary cybersecurity risk. In terms of our surveys, the 2022 survey showed a lot of improvement in adoption of certain policies. However, certain other policies lagged behind previous surveys. And so for improvements that we've seen a pretty expansive adoption of password management policies, with 85% of responding local governments having implemented those. 68% of policies or governments implementing policies on personal devices. And however, policies regarding software patching, only 60% had those. For clauses about vendors, contracts, and cloud services in their cybersecurity contracts and policies, only 41%. And drastically and really unfortunately, only 35% of governments had a cybersecurity risk management plan in place. Those last three that I described had lower adoption rates than we've seen in other surveys. And while it's encouraging that a majority of local governments have adopted certain policies, the fact that barely over a third of them had a cybersecurity risk management plan is shocking and does not bode well. And we also asked about multi-factor authentication, which was adopted by about 59% of governments, and is encouraging as NIST no longer recommends frequent password changes. And finally, 43% of responding governments indicated that they had implemented a data protection policy, otherwise known as a privacy policy. Again, that less than half of these governments had adopted a data protection policy. A cybersecurity policy clause for third parties or a risk management plan is discouraging, to say the least. And I'm happy to share the floor.
Let me just add one thing to that, and that is that many of these policies can be adopted together. In other words, the cybersecurity plan, okay, might have elements of or complete policies for passwords and a variety of other things within them. We often do that.
Just a quick follow-up before I ask Tamecka to jump in. There was one big event, right? The 2020, the whole of what happened with the pandemic and work from home. What is a big change that you see from what was happening before the pandemic versus after the pandemic?
We haven't really taken a look at that. That's probably something we should have included in the 2022 survey, but we had really significant limits on what we could add to the survey. But I think what we'll probably see is more and more people going back to the office reluctantly, particularly in this area of technology where you don't have to be on site.
Right.
In my personal experience working at the Division of IT at UMBC, I noticed that we've been spending a lot of time catching up to what we missed during the pandemic, because during the pandemic, we spent a lot of time shifting to remote work and ensuring that we had those capabilities to be off campus or off site. And now that we've kind of shifted back, or at least into a medium, we need to catch up on all of these policies and all of these things that we kind of left at the wayside. We need to make sure we're getting back into that cycle and system of, making sure we're doing everything we need to do every quarter and every semester, at least in the higher education world.
Mm-hmm. So, Tamecka?
Yes, I'm
Given
bursting at the
all-
seams over here.
Yes. Go for it.
Well, first, I want to just express my gratitude for folks like you who are doing the research for the practitioners. We know this, but as you all know, without data, you're just lips flapping in the wind. So having that research and having that data, knowing that we don't have the time to do it, knowing that we have that as a resource, please accept my personal gratitude because our job and our role is not easy. I've been in the CIO role for 19 months now, and in my 7th month of the CIO role position, we had a 1 in 1,000 year flood, which rendered our entire city hall inoperable. My team and I, so there's COVID and folks are still recovering. And as you mentioned, returning back to normal and getting some sense of normalcy and back to standard operating procedures from COVID. Then we had the flood and we lost City Hall. Prior to losing City Hall, I put together a 3-year plan. And to answer your question, Dr. Ganapati, what I'm seeing between before the pandemic and after the pandemic is this acceleration in digital transformation. And that's a loaded statement because the more things that you digitize, the more things you have to secure, the more things you have to be aware of. For instance, and I'm sorry if I'm a little all over the place because I got so many things going on in my mind right now. There is no longer a separation between technology and the business. They are totally aligned. And what happens is, for example, in September, we had a business email compromise event where a member of our team inadvertently wired $1.2 million to a bad actor. And the first thing people did was they started calling IT. It really wasn't a technology issue. It was a controls, security, but it used the technology. So all 3 of those things combined, the technology, the business, the software provider, who's a third party, cloud suite provider, all of those things have to converge to make sure that we are adequately addressing all of those risks that digital transformation presents. It presents an enormous opportunity to enhance customer service, streamline processes, promote transparency. But the other side of it, it now creates all of these different risks and gaps that we're, frankly, in the government, typically we're behind in dealing with that. And then the other side of it is the funding. Unfortunately, a lot of government agencies are very reactive. I can ask for $1 million for a cybersecurity program, and I will more likely than not get turned down. If I ask for that after a cyber attack or after my next door neighbor has been attacked, I'm probably going to get a yes. So this whole idea of cybersecurity policies and government, it's multifaceted. The other part of it is the human side of it. We have been issuing phishing campaigns for the last 6 months. And I just got the report today. There are over 100 folks in our organization that not only clicked on the link, but put in their credentials, put in there after we've had cybersecurity awareness training. We send emails, we put posters out. I even had one of my team members dress up as a fish during cybersecurity awareness month. And to know that we still have folks that are still doing this is unbelievable. But here you go on the human side of it. How are we working with HR and the unions to put some type of consequences? If you know you're not going to get any consequence if you keep doing this over and over again, then what's your incentive to change your behavior? So it's so much bigger than technology. And I think a lot of folks in the industry and in government may or may not fully appreciate the fact that it's no more a technology issue. It's cultural, it's behavioral, it's business. And for those who are the decision makers on whether or not we spend $1 million on a cybersecurity plan, the IT professionals have to understand that we can't go in the room talking tech. We have to speak to business. I can't go in and say, I need $1 million for this cybersecurity program. I have to say, if we don't do this, here's the impact and the risk to operations, which will result in a loss of revenue, a loss of life, if we're talking about public safety and impacting communications, and what it means to the business. And most technology folks aren't necessarily prepared for that, but that's what we have to start teaching them. If you want to sit in a corner and code all day, maybe not so much, but to be an impactful and an effective change agent and effective in leveraging technology in government space, you have to take all of those components into account.
So that's a very good segue into the policies that Laura was also talking about. Tamecka, what do you see as the major barriers from your perspective in the city?
Well, for us, fortunately, our city manager is a former CIO, so he understands, and that has been very beneficial for me. Many of my colleagues do not have that luxury. So he's been able to make it a priority for the other directors to attend executive level cybersecurity training. I mean, I even had a couple of my directors go down to FIU. I had them come here. And he's also going to support me in working with human resources to try to change, believe it or not, our performance evaluation. There's an option on the performance evaluation for safety. Well, you know, if you're working in an office, you know, it's not like we're working in a factory. So, you know, it's kind of like a no-brainer. Everybody gets a high mark on that. But I'd like to see us add cyber safety to that. So if you're on that list of people who have clicked on that phishing email, then you're getting a bad mark on that. But again, in government, you've got to work your way through the unions, make sure it's fair, make sure it's equitable, make sure it's not subjective, what are the consequences, and so on and so forth. So having that support from my city manager will certainly help me push that forward, but I don't think that's the case in many other organizations. So I would say consequences to responding to behavior modification, creating a more cyber aware culture. Because at the end of the day, no matter how many firewalls you have in, no matter how many rules you have in, if the weakest link is the user, you know, I love to use that analogy of a house. You can have a bolted, you have an alarm system, a bolted lock, a gate, a moat, whatever you want to call it. But if somebody's opening up the back window and letting them in, then it's all for naught. So I think a lot of it is going to be focused on human behavior, cultural awareness, cyber aware. And then I think local governments also have an opportunity to bring it to the community. I am working with one of the professors at NSU to provide internet safety training for 55 and older, because unfortunately our 55 and older crowd have lost millions of dollars in internet scams. And the truth of the matter is unless you're a large corporation or it's a large amount of money, the FBI, they don't even have the resources to investigate every single one. So I think local government, not just internally, but they have an opportunity to maybe support and promote community events for cyber safety, cyber aware, and then even workforce development. There is a major gap in security professionals, a major gap in diversity in IT in general. So you could go so many different places with this, but I think it's going to start at what you guys are doing with the research, making the connection between the tech and the business, and then making the connection between investing in this to those outcomes.
Great. So segueing from that, Dawn and Laura, what do you see as the kind of the emerging questions and emerging kind of issues that we don't have the answers to? What would you like to see more being done in this space?
First of all, let me thank Tamecka. I'm going to watch that tape over and over again because you said so much, such a short period of time, all of which we agree with, totally agree with, especially the part about the weakest link being people. So what was coming down the horizon that we are concerned about? I think it's more of the same. I don't think there's much new. I don't think there's much new out there. The bad guys are getting more numerous. That's for one thing, for sure. They're working out of, governments like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. They're very good at what they do, and they keep doing it. And that is why it's so very, very important that our local governments do a better job with cybersecurity, or they're going to continue getting breached. Baltimore got breached 2 years in a row and didn't learn a thing about it. What did they do? They fired the CIO, who had been warning them of the problem. So that can't continue to happen. And as Laura pointed out in the policy adoption business, many, many local governments are missing the boat completely by not having policies, not implementing them. And I think the 2016 survey, but correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, we ask about policy implementation. Not only do you have these policies, are they being implemented effectively? And majorities in just about every category said, nah, not really. We're not implementing them properly. Well, what good are they doing if they're not being implemented properly?
Do we know why? Did they say why? Was it because lack of support from executive leadership? Why weren't they able to implement them?
We didn't link the two, but because we were getting the same answers to what are the biggest barriers, that's probably the case. They don't have the staff, they don't have the trained staff, and they don't have the funding. So they can only go so far. And that hasn't gotten a whole lot better since our 2016 survey.
May I ask, and this is not to put the spotlight on CIOs because I'm a CIO, but sometimes some of the barriers that we face, like I said, when I asked for instance, last year, I did a presentation to our budget advisory board, and I said, we have X number of end-of-life devices. I need money to replace these. And I kid you not, I had a member of the team said, well, what's the cost if we go down? Is it like an old car where it's cheaper to replace the parts than buying a new car? And you know what? Initially, it kind of stung me, but I thanked him for that because it challenged me. And I put money together to do a business impact analysis. And what we're doing is we're meeting with every single director and asking them, if the technology fails, what does that mean to you? What's the dollar amount? What's the impact on your mission? Get them engaged, get them involved, because again, there's been this disconnect that, oh, that's IT. That's IT's problem. It's not IT's problem. It's the business problem. When I get them to think about that, okay, if you don't have access to all your files, what does that mean to you as a public works director or a parks and rec director? Now that they're talking about it, now I can go back and provide that information to that budget advisory board. Well, if we don't replace this, we increase our risk for these outages, which have this dollar impact to the organization. That's a very different conversation. And that's where I mean, as IT professionals, and I know it's hard because we like to play with toys and we like our jargon and our technical terms, but I think for us to further this conversation, we have to talk business. We have to talk outcomes. I've shared with my team, I said, nobody cares about the gadget that we put in the emergency vehicle. Nobody cares about it. What they care about is how many lives were saved because that gadget communicated to the doctor at the hospital that there's a stroke victim and every minute counts. And by them already having everything ready, that increased the chances of that person surviving from that stroke. So that's where that connection between the tech and the business has to come in play. Otherwise, we'll never get the support for the funding and the resources that we need to do what we know, because what we do, it's like you turn the light switch on and the light comes on. Nobody really understands it. They look at IT as a black hole. So those are my thoughts around, even though there are barriers, the funding, the resources, but I think the root cause may be there's a lack of understanding and a lack of connection between the tech and the business.
Tamekka, I think you raise a pretty awesome point about the connection between legacy technology and people's interest in what's new and what's coming down the pike. I think when you bring up legacy technology, it immediately reminded me of New Jersey Transit during the pandemic needing to bring on retired programmers because their transit system is based on COBOL. And this programming language is only used by people who are now retired. I mean, it's known by people who are now retired, but is still utilized in order to have the trains run. And people are very focused on AI, quantum encryption, post-quantum encryption, and machine learning, LLMs, AI and decision making. And those things are really important, but cybersecurity, as Don mentioned, is really about the fundamentals. Are you protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility of your information systems? And that's really ultimately what it comes down to. AI and other things will impact that, but it's in order to address those things, I believe it really comes down to the fundamentals. Not to completely ignore them, but if you don't have the fundamentals in place, you're not going to be able to play ball on the basketball court, so to speak.
Yeah, all of these points are well taken. And one of the points I usually make is, well, cybersecurity is essentially an organizational problem with technical solutions to add into that the tech side of it. But what I'm hearing, Tamekka, you say is also a communication thing, that we have to be able to communicate the importance of this to the leadership.
Yeah.
So does any of the communication part, Don and Laura, does that come up as a barrier in what you have looked at?
I would say it takes an astute tech person like Tamekka in order to be able to understand that communication might be an issue. I think a lot of tech people speak the way they speak and don't necessarily know how to translate. And that's why having somebody like Tamekka in that role who's able to translate between the tech and the elected officials is so essential, because then the elected officials, unless they've experienced a breach before, don't really understand the importance of cybersecurity in their organization. Like Tamekka said, cybersecurity and technology is strewn throughout an organization, and without them, the organization will not be able to function.
Right, and as we are going through this, the audience, we are also open to questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat or in the Q&A.
I would like to ask a question. About a year and a half ago, the state of Florida passed cybersecurity training and funded cybersecurity training through the state for all municipalities. So it goes, it's beyond before you know for the the frontline employees, but it also includes training the leaders of the organization, the elected officials, the appointed officials on all of this. Do you see that kind of training in other states? Do you see that training as people being open to it? Like just in general, specifically for the smaller organizations? I understand that finances are a problem, but when you're not having the financial problem because you are able to, the state's going to pay for it, what are some of the other aspects within an entity that might push back against some of this training?
If I remember correctly, the last survey we did asked about whether local governments require training of their staff, mandatory training. And most said no, they didn't. They do have training, but training is not required by most of them. And we haven't been able to get into the quality of training because we don't think that most local governments measure that anyway. And if we do this sort of training, what are the outcomes? In other words, are there more people clicking on a fishing expedition than there were before? But that's not being measured, so we just don't know the answer to that question.
I'm measuring that.
Good for you.
So what we did for 2022, there's 2022, we did a phishing campaign the first day of the month. As you know, October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And during the whole month, we had a couple of activities. We did daily tips. Like I said, we had someone dress up as Freddy the Fish. We hung posters up in the elevator and around the city. And then we did the phishing campaign again at the end of the month. And it did reduce by 30%. It did,
Terrific.
It go down by 30%.
Terrific.
Laura, did you want to add anything? So we do have a question out here from Erica that she's asking, in what ways can local government secure more funding to allocate towards cybersecurity? Are there grant programs that can aid with funding? Any thoughts on that?
So our last survey asked about whether local governments planned on using the American Rescue Plan Act funds to improve cybersecurity. Less than half plan to use funds for that because it's generally a more expensive pool of funds that are not limited to cybersecurity. But also, there was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which allocated $800 million to state and local cybersecurity. So I would really recommend reaching out to your state government. They should have some part of their organization dealing with distributing those funds to local governments. But also I would really recommend taking and utilizing free resources that are out there. CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, has free scanning tools that you can utilize. The Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, MSISAC, also is free to be a member. There's over 10,000 local government and public agency type organizations that are members. They provide many free services, and you can also conduct what they call the nationwide cybersecurity review with them in order to understand what your current cybersecurity posture is like and help target it to what you would like it to be. And it's based off of the NIST cybersecurity framework. So those are some options that are out there that you can utilize at free or no cost and potentially gain some funding from your state.
Hmm.
As Georgette mentioned, we were very fortunate in Florida that we did receive, along with the policy, also came funding, and we were able to enhance we already had cybersecurity training here, but we were able to enhance it by extending it to the executive level, because if you're a public administrator, your information is posted all over the web. And if you're on LinkedIn, now somebody knows what college you went to, where you worked before. And when you talk about social engineering and all the things that go with that, we're prime targets. So having that executive level training is very important. So we've been fortunate to have that, and I'm thankful. I hope our state continues to provide that.
So taking off on that, you go ahead, Don.
No, go ahead.
Mine is a follow-up question to what Georgette asked, and how you all answered that. One of the points with the local government cybersecurity, at least with the policy side, is also the support that we can receive from the state, right? So in the state of Florida, as Tamecka and Georgette mentioned, there is an explicit kind of a policy towards training, and that's a statewide thing with local governments. But is there other kind of support that state can provide to the local governments such that they can be better prepared? What other kind of support do you think there could be that could be mutually beneficial?
Some states have National Guard units. I can't name them offhand. They're easy to find. They have National Guard units that local governments can call on to help develop cybersecurity plans of various kinds, and they will do gaming with local governments. And if local governments get breached, they will come in and they will work with the local governments to get back online. So that's one resource. Now, not every state has that, but states do.
I'm currently working on a project, which is very exciting for me because it's one of the recommendations we made in our book. But utilize your higher education workforce. I mean, so we're developing a program in which it's a pilot program where we're connecting cybersecurity undergraduate students to work with the State Security Operations Center. But we're also doing, when I mentioned the NCSR earlier, we're helping connect graduate students in cybersecurity to local governments to help them conduct their NCSR. And I just think that it's a huge boon to workforce development. You're helping train students and give them experience. You're helping local governments and the state government at low cost. And it's just really a benefit to everybody around. So I would really strongly recommend utilizing the talent that's around you.
Mm-hmm. It's wonderful. Tamecka, anything that you think the state of Florida is not doing yet, but could potentially do?
Well, like I said, I think it's great. The digital services and the cybersecurity local grant, especially for smaller cities that just doesn't have the resources, even like a city like Fort Lauderdale. As I shared before, I think it's multifaceted. So I think there should be more of an engagement with our human resources professionals and our unions to help understand how can we help create a more culture aware and acknowledging and realizing that it's not just about the technology, that there's human behavior involved. And unfortunately, good behavior should be rewarded, bad behavior should be dealt with. I think the other thing too is being able, and maybe this is where the two disciplines have to come together, being able to translate a technology risk into a business impact in the business language. So I think those are areas where there could potentially be better partnership and better support and better development.
So as we approach the last quarter of this and we start winding down, there's a bigger question that I'm going to ask all three of you on cyber insurance. We haven't touched on that piece yet. What do you see in terms of the trends that are going on the cyber insurance side? as to what state and local governments are doing, and what are the kind of alternative kind of arrangements to get to that insurance.
Well, I'll be the first to say that I've not dug into that as much. So I may not have a detailed amount of knowledge, but from some of the conversations that I've had, the cost of the premiums are going up so much and they're so high that there is this thought about, well, maybe we should self-insure ourselves. So I know those are conversations that are going on. And then the other thing I would say is business leaders, not just IT, but also executive level staff should go through the exercise of understanding how they spend their cybersecurity money. There's the prevention, that piece of the pie. There's the incident management, I believe. There's the mitigation, and then there's the recovery. Which one, how do you divvy up that money, and which one is going to give you the most bang for your buck? And really, those are business decisions that at the end of the day, not necessarily around technology. So if we want to spend most of our money on prevention, that's good. You know, the awareness, the videos. I spoke to a business leader who said they started putting cybersecurity posters in the bathroom stalls, because you're going to be in there for about 15, 20 minutes. We're going to make sure you read it. So some of that, another one of my colleagues created a kind of like a comedy video. So it made it more engaging instead of the dry, boring, don't click on this, and it made it fun. Maybe some videos getting the city leadership into it. So your prevention, but even with the best prevention plan, you're never 100% safe. So you still have to have that detection, that mitigation, and then that disaster recovery. The disaster recovery, we talk about disasters. Emergency management is very big in our organization, especially after Hurricane Wilma and 9/11. Well, we have to treat cybersecurity the same way. We're not there yet, but I would like for our organization, every year at the beginning of hurricane season, we do a mock emergency operations activation. Well, I'd like to do one for a cybersecurity attack. And again, getting folks to understand that, for the most part, it's not a matter of if, it's when. So I think that all of those things are very important, and those activities will help us be better prepared.
When you onboard new staff, whatever department, they onboarded with cybersecurity, or is that something that comes later?
Yeah, no, they have 30 days within their hiring date to complete the standard cybersecurity training. But through some of the policies at the state level, we're working on enhancing that, especially for the executive level, because there's another layer for not only the executive level, but team members who have access to private information or sensitive information. And like I said, the incident that we had last year with the business email compromise, perhaps, if that person had gone through a training, because what happened was they impersonated the company that we were working with to build our new police department. So it came in looking like, a legitimate email. So teaching those folks who are not technology folks, they're finance folks, to have an eagle eye on these types of things. That's probably more than just that regular training that they get the first 30 days of their employment.
By the way, that same thing happened twice here in Collier County. Once Collier County government, one of their finance staff paid somebody that shouldn't have been paid. And the same thing happened in the city of Naples. So it's fairly common.
I do want to touch on cybersecurity insurance. So in our survey, we did ask about adoption in our 2016 and in the 2020. And I think something like less than a third in 2016 had purchased cybersecurity insurance. I think it's something above 3/4 now that have cybersecurity insurance in terms of local governments, which is pretty astounding to me in that period of time. And sometimes they can be provided by the state, covering it for everybody. But something that I've noticed recently is that many insurers are denying coverage because they're considering cyber attacks to be an act of war. And it kind of defeats the purpose of purchasing it to a certain extent. And I'm not here to advocate one way or the other about whether it's beneficial to have it, peace of mind, whether you're required to have it, whatever. But the fact that these claims are being denied under act of war is a little disconcerting to me, because while getting cybersecurity insurance can help you improve your cybersecurity posture, if it's not going to ultimately help you in the long run, I have concerns about that.
Another
Is
thing I want to,
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Well, I wanted to know, is that industry regulated just like, you know, homeowners insurance and car insurance?
I don't think as strongly. I know New York State has really been getting into regulating cybersecurity insurance. But I haven't been following all that much. I mean, it is kind of a very dry topic, not my favorite topic, but I would look into what New York State is doing. I think they're kind of leading the way on that.
Let me mention, because this is related to cyber insurance, let me mention ransomware. We feel very strongly that local governments not pay ransom, because it gives the bad guys more money to do more harm with. In other words, they get $1 million or 20 million or whatever it might be, and then they can just go on and do more by way of ransomware attacks. So local governments are really feeding that monster if they pay ransomware.
Yeah, I believe the state of Florida has a policy now in place, which has been there for about a couple of years now, that public entities cannot pay any ransom for
Yeah, and
any
you
of the
know what,
ransom.
Dr. Ganapati, we had brought that up at one of the executive level cybersecurity trainings, and one of my assistant directors said, well, if we're not allowed to pay, does that mean the state is going to help us with recovery services? Because they compared, I think the city of Atlanta, where they said the recovery, they didn't pay. They were asking for, I don't remember what the number was, but it was a lower number than what it cost them to recover. So that could be a policy discussion. If we're mandated not to pay, what kind of assurances do we have that we will get help in recovering?
Yeah, Atlanta wound up paying $17 million.
Yeah, and I think the ransom was like maybe some Bitcoin amount that was like significantly lower than that.
Correct.
Like that.
Same thing in Baltimore. Baltimore, I think, paid 18 million. And their ransom request was, I don't even think it was $1 million. Do you remember, Laura?
No, not off the top of my head, but I think you're right. It was less than $1 million, maybe like $500,000 or something.
Yeah.
And I agree. We don't want to encourage these bad actors. We don't want to embolden them, but you know, from a dollar and cent standpoint, I mean, if you just look at the financial impact, you know, it would have been cheaper to pay. Although I don't subscribe to that and I don't promote that. But how do we make, you know, how do we support each other so that we can do the right thing?
Correct.
Right, and that's where some of the controversy is about whether to pay or not to pay. And even when we pay, there's no full confidence that the recovery has happened, and there could be a second follow-up attack, as has happened here, just north of where I'm here, Tamecka, you know, the place I'm talking about. So the potential risks, even when you pay, that there's no full confidence about what you have recovered and whether that's secure or not.
Are you saying that we can't trust the bad guys? Wow.
That's great. So as we come to the last 2 minutes, I want to do a quick lightning round and see what you know, the big points that you think we should pay attention to or cover. Don?
Well, I think we've covered most of what we needed to cover, and Mika did a great job as an advocate. She doesn't sound like a technologist at all, which is probably a good thing. You can speak their language, which I know is not the case in many governments, and that's a big disconnect. I think the point that you made about the business approach, the right one. It's got to be looked at that way. That way, every player in the game, they've got something in the game to lose, and if they promote cybersecurity, do it well, there's less risk. And then the point that you made about people being the weakest link, also very, very good.
Great. Laura?
I just want to leave on a positive note. I mean, this all does seem dire and everything's falling apart, but regardless of the size of your government, you're not alone. There are other peer local governments of yours in your state. You have your state government, you have CISA and other resources of the federal government at your disposal. And just trying to put everything in place so you don't have to wait until you're embarrassed or until your elected official is embarrassed. And then, this is a undeserved, we're not going to get a claim. They're not going to be ticker tape parades for stopping a cybersecurity attack, and if this is what I like to say, if I seem like I'm not busy, that's a good thing. If I'm not running around with my head cut off like a chicken, that means I've done my job. So that's kind of how I would try to present things if I had to.
Well, I agree with Laura on leaving on a positive note. I've endured 3 different attacks, and each one of them, I can tell you, our local government, well, not local government, I guess that would be federal government, they were there. When we had the business email compromise, within 24 hours, someone from the Secret Service was actively engaged and working alongside of us, and we were able to recover every penny. So that was a testament to the relationships, the partnerships, and working together. So to your point, Laura, yes, you're not alone. I would also say that we have to bring the human back into tech and cyber, because most of the time that's going to be our strongest weapon, but also our weakest link. Our partnerships, working together. There was a gentleman I heard speak one time, and he said, why 9/11 happened is because there was so much siloed things going on, and we weren't thinking out. We were thinking inside of the box when our bad actors were thinking outside the box. So together we're stronger. And as much as I love tech, the truth is we got to bring the human part back into it and build those relationships. Together we're stronger.
Great. On that very positive note, thank you all for today's webinar and being able to join, and for your time. It was a very interesting conversation. I highly recommend taking a look at Don and Laura's book on cybersecurity in local government.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Over to you, Georgette.
Thank you, Sukumar. Thank you to Don, Laura, and Tamecka. This has been a fascinating hour. I have a lot of notes. I've jotted things down. I have more questions, but we are out of time for more questions. So I will send you all emails so you can expect to hear from me, because I'd like to continue this conversation. For those of you who want to watch it again, because there's a lot of stuff that I wasn't able to write down fast enough, again, this has been recorded, and it will be on Stig's YouTube channel, which you can get to through our website at ssstig.info. Thank you very much for attending our March Lunch and Learn, and I hope you are all able to attend in the future. Thank you again.